Today on the Family Answer Man, we're answering your questions about prepping, hoarding, and OCD from a Biblical Worldview on the Family Answer Man program. This is David Orges here with Dr. Mark Crosby, the Family Answer Man himself. Now, this is a time that is designed to answer your questions commonly asked, both in the counseling and church settings. Our goal is to answer questions from a general sense, from a biblical worldview, through the lens of our collective years of experience and education to help you, our listeners, have a stronger, healthier, and happier family. Now, we want to thank the incredible people at Days Smokehouse and Specialty Meats, located at 35770 LA Highway 16 in Denham Springs, and Winter's Air, located in Denham Springs and servicing the Denham Springs and surrounding areas, for underwriting today's show. The Family Answer Man is a show. It is not a therapy session, nor is it advice specific to your situations. Mental health is a very serious issue. Family dynamics can be and often are very complicated and dynamic. So for in-depth answers to your questions, we encourage you to seek professional counsel specific to your unique circumstances. Now, we hope this episode of the Family Answer Man will encourage you and inspire you to make changes that will lead to a stronger, healthier, and happier family. As I said, I am your host today, David Orges, and I am excited to be here today, as always, with Dr. Mark Crosby, our Family Answer Man. He has his PhD in psychology. He has a master's in clinical counseling. He is a licensed professional counselor, licensed LMFT, which is a licensed marriage and family therapist, and he is a licensed counselor supervisor, and that is going to come in handy today as we talk about some things that we may have either seen on TV or experienced in our own lives or in lives of others to varying degrees. And, when we talk about this issue and the topic that we're going to talk about today, there's going to be some questions that people are going to want to know how much is too much, what's healthy versus unhealthy. How do you, just rule of thumb, generally help people understand what's healthy versus what becomes unhealthy when we're talking about some of these issues? Right.
Today, of course, we're talking about hoarding and prepping, and those are very sensitive topics for some families and some issues. And so the main rule of thumb, as you would put it, is how much is this, again, keeping me from living a normal, healthy life? In other words, is what I'm doing, is what I'm spending, is it starting to take over my life? Is it starting to keep me from buying and enjoying other things that are more important, perhaps, or necessary? For example, am I spending all my money, keeping my gas cans full, but I'm not able to pay my current utility bill?
Right.
And so a lot of people are struggling in these areas where they're spending all this time prepping, or as far as the hoarding is concerned, where they can no longer walk into their bedroom, they can no longer walk into their bathroom, they can no longer walk into their living room because it is just so full of things that they would not let go of, possessions that they hold on to. And these things become, again, a source now of problem. It becomes a source of being very unhealthy. It becomes a source maybe of being very unsanitary in some situations.
So I'm curious, when we start talking about these issues, is this are these things that people are able usually to recognize on their own, or do they usually typically need an outside view or perspective to kind of clue them into, hey, This might be a little too far?
Right. There are some people who recognize it as a problem. They know they have a problem. They recognize it's a problem. They recognize that I just have a difficult time letting go of my possessions. And in a way, it's a sense of having some sort of control over their life. This is a way of thinking I have some sort of control. And so, but they do recognize that this is an unhealthy way of having control. So what begins to happen is I'm going to need this. I can't let go of this. And it's not because it has value in some cases, nor is it because it's sentimental in some cases. But in most cases, it's just that it's mine and I do not want to let it go. It's mine. I cannot let it go. And who knows, and this is the phrase I hear all the time, I might need it someday.
That's right.
And so it's there in their shed, it's in their garage, it's in their closet. They haven't used it in 25 years, but they might need it someday. That's right. And so that's their mantra. And so it's very difficult. Now, there's others who say, what's wrong with this? It's mine. I need it. I might need it one day. I haven't used it in 25 years, but who knows? I might need it tomorrow. And they will tell their story of how they could use it one day, or maybe how their grandfather, needed it back when they were a kid, or whatever this thing may be. And so they cannot depart with it. They can't let it go. They can't get rid of it. They can't throw it away. And so they just hold on to it, and then they hold on to the next one and the next one. And they may have 5, 6, 8, 10, 12 of the exact same thing, but they just cannot let it go. And it becomes a problem, like I said, when it begins to interfere with your day-to-day living. Mm-hmm. When you can't walk through the living room, when you can't walk through the kitchen, or when it becomes unsanitary or even unsafe, that's when it becomes a problem.
Well, I think that's a great framework for us to work from as we look at our first question for today for the Family Answer Man. The question that was written in, I'm going to go ahead and read it for us. It says, my husband always had quirks, right? Which is a nice way to put it, I guess. However, in the past 2 years, he has become obsessed with prepping and hoarding. He was recently diagnosed with OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder.
Right.
He says that he's trying to protect us, but it's costing us a lot of money. What can we do?
Okay. Well, first of all, we need to know what we're dealing with. Obsessive compulsive disorder basically is simply this. It's having these recurrent intrusive thoughts. Most of these recurrent intrusive thoughts are based on fear. Fear of what might go wrong, fear of what might happen, fear that something terrible is going to take place. And so that is the obsession. I have these thoughts, they won't go away, they're intrusive, they're based on fear. In some cases, a person may know that these fears probably are not justified. In other words, they realize this is really never going to happen. I don't know why I keep thinking this. Some actually believe that these fears are legitimate and they indeed could happen. In most cases, it really doesn't matter. They're recurrent, they're intrusive, they don't go away. The compulsion then, these are the actions to reduce the fear. So the compulsion is, what can I do to, again, control, to manage these fears? Now, sometimes it starts in childhood. There are children, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, teenagers as well. They will have these intrusive thoughts, and they'll have these compulsions then that try to help to balance these thoughts. Now, again, for example, it takes various forms. For example, if you have a fear of germs, that's the obsession. The compulsion is cleaning. So the person who is constantly washing their hands, constantly cleaning, the bathroom, constantly cleaning the dishes. I've met people that they'll wash their dishes in soapy hot water, dry them off and put them in the dishwasher. Okay. They want to make sure there's not a germ, within 100 miles of that plate or that fork or whatever. And so some would argue that is a form of having an obsessive compulsive, disorder where I'm obsessed over the fear of germs. The compulsion is cleaning. For some, it's the fear of forgetting. That's the obsession. I'm afraid I'm going to forget something. And so the compulsion is they're checking. I got to check. I got to double check. I got to triple check. Did I lock the door? Did I go? I need to check the door again. You're driving down the road and, oh my goodness, I know I checked the front door. Did I check the back door? And so you go back and you check the back door and you leave and go, I need to go double check the back door again. And so again, there's this fear of forgetting something or something taking place. And so the compulsion is, I've got to check it. For some, it's the fear of missing something. And so they constantly repeat. They're always repeating back and forth, repeating. Some, it's the fear of being out of control. And so that's the person who arranges everything. Everything has to be just neat. And so the mantra is, there's a place for everything and everything has a place.
That's right.
So that's their mantra. And so, but it's the fear of being out of control. And so arranging everything in a certain order, it's got to go from highest to lowest, from lowest to highest. And there's just that obsession and then of being out of control. And then the compulsion is arranging. And here's where the hoarding comes in. It's the fear of not having enough, or what I need or need something, or when I need something, in the worst case scenario, I may not have it. So it's that fear of, what if something happens and I need this and I don't have it? And so that's the fear, that's the obsession, and the compulsion is, I'm never going to let anything go. Now again, OCD in many cases is often genetic. Our parents often were this way, our grandparents perhaps were this way. And in some cases, on a physiological level, sometimes it means there's a serotonin, which is a neurochemical in the brain, that is out of balance, that may cause this. So in some cases, SSRIs or medications that help balance the serotonin in the brain are sometimes used for this. Sometimes they're dealing with a trauma or a fear from their past. And so OCD is a real diagnosis. As a matter of fact, it's perhaps more common than others. About 3% of the population has OCD. So it is far more common than perhaps others. Now, here's the thing. I think we have to be fair with our friends who want to prep, okay?
Okay.
We have to be fair because in the past few years, we have seen some unique things. We had a pandemic that shut things down. People were unable to leave their homes.
Couldn't get the toilet paper.
Couldn't get the toilet paper. People were afraid to go out.
Right.
People were afraid to go to Walmart or Walgreens, wherever. And so there is that fear. We have seen in the last 2 or 3 years major hurricanes. I mean, we just saw Hurricane Ian, just rip through Fort Myers and that part of Florida, and people are struggling. People who tried to ride out the storm lost, communication. They lost the ability to get to the mainland, if you will, if they were one of the barrier islands. And so we've seen supply chains disrupted. We saw back in the winter of 2021, the state of Texas lost its power grid during one of the most severe winter storms, and people were literally, breaking up their furniture to put in their fireplace to keep
Just
warm.
to get some heat.
Just to keep warm. So the thing is that I think, prepping is something we need to be careful of and mindful of because, again, there is a difference between hoarding and prepping. Hoarding, for example, means this. Hoarding is the difficulty of parting with possessions regardless of their value. It's one thing to collect, baseball cards. It's one thing to collect, maybe other things that are value to you. That's not hoarding, that's collecting. Hoarding is I'm going to hold on to things regardless of the value. Hoarding does not always mean if it has sentimental value. Okay, for example, I know people who still have their high school yearbook, or they have, pictures from the past, or they kept their, basketball jersey, from 1987 or whatever.
Yes, indeed.
And so that's not hoarding because those things have some sentimental value. Hoarding is, again, it's just holding on to things regardless of the value. Second of all, there is a literal distress when you let go of something if you have a problem with hoarding. Because there's this thought that you will possibly need it one day. And this distress is caused because what if I need this, now I don't have it? And so, again, it doesn't matter. It could be a screwdriver. It could be, an old shoe. But the thing is, I might need it one day.
So it's more than just, oh man, I might need this. And so I'm going to hold on to this great scrap piece of wood or the scrap piece of metal or I've got a jar of old screws in my garage, right? Because you might need them every once in a while.
Right.
But you said a word that I think maybe is key there. You talked about there's a literal distress that somebody experiences.
Yeah. In other words, if I let go of this, I will be out of control if I ever need it. If I let go of this, I will not have the opportunity or the power or the ability to fix this or do something because I don't have this anymore. That possession of this thing, whatever this thing is, gives me a sense of power and control.
Right. That's a lot deeper than, hey, this might be useful.
Right.
That's a lot deeper psychological issue.
Exactly. Here's where it becomes a problem. When this clutter, again, as we said earlier, causes difficulty in your general living. When you can't find, the refrigerator because there's so much clutter, or when it creates an unsafe environment, that's when it becomes, really problematic. And as we said before, there are two types of people who are hoarders. There's the one who has what's called fair insight. What that means is they see the problem for what it is. And there's one who has poor insight, which means they don't see the problem. So again, the question that many are asking is, so how do you manage this? This, I think, what our person who's writing today is asking. Well, again, there's 3 or 4 things that we have to consider. Number one, cognitive behavioral therapy often helps. And that's a fancy way or a fancy technique or a fancy way of putting that you help a person learn how to rethink some things, how to change their thought process concerning these possessions that they're hanging on to. In some cases, next, family intervention. Sometimes if it gets too unsafe or too unsanitary, the family needs to come in and intervene and basically kind of take over. Not only that, but I think it's also it's helpful when you gradually start removing. Like if a person has an old pair of shoes they haven't worn in 10 years, you gradually remove them. But here's something too that researchers have discovered with people who hoard, and that is, if they recognize that they can give these things to those who can and will use them, that has a tendency to give them the ability to let go of it a little easier.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it really is. That if someone else is going to can use this, and someone else will use it, it seems to be helpful in, again, the process of letting it go a little easier and a little more ready. And so that's important for, I think, the person who is working with the hoarder.
Right. Well, because that takes away an element of, a lot of times, trauma from the experience of a hoarder having everything cleaned out. Right.
Right.
It gives them maybe a little bit of what you've already talked about, a sense of control and a sense of purpose of, hey, I felt like this was going to serve a purpose, and I was able to give it to somebody that could use that.
Right. And again, we heard, that not that long ago, a person whose family came in and cleaned the house out, and the family member came home and they were distressed. They did not see the fact that the house was neat and clean and orderly and sanitary,
right.
But they were upset that someone had kind of taken over their life and cleaned them out, and they were upset over the fact that these were my things and someone took over. When you're working with someone who is a hoarder, again, gradual, help them to rethink and help them to know that what we're doing, we're giving this, not throwing it away into a dumpster, but we're giving it to someone who could use it. And look, we've all seen the show Hoarders. Maybe we have a person in our family. They will have things, in some cases in their home, that still have the sale ticket on it.
Right. In the original package.
Still in the original package, in the box, in the attic. Sometimes still gift wrapped or whatever, and so a lot of times, if you say we're going to take these things to Goodwill or take these things to the local thrift store, that is often helpful to that person, because again, they're rethinking, maybe I'm helping someone, maybe someone can get some use out of this, and that's very helpful.
That's really good insight, and it, I think, can help a lot of people maybe avoid some of the struggle and the trauma that can happen from, and like you said, I mean, violation of personal space, right? A violation of what you feel are the things that are yours. I wouldn't want somebody to come into my house, take all my stuff out, and that's, guys usually experience that. The wives clean their sink area, and you're like, man, where are my Q-tips? Or where's my toothpaste? There was a little bit left in there. I was still using that, right?
And remember, the obsessive compulsive person really does struggle with someone that wants to take over or take control of their life. In other words, they want to have this sense of control, and this is a way, not always a healthy way, but a way in their mind of being in control. And again, in most cases, you'll see where there's someone in their life that is so overbearing and so controlling that this is, again, their way of protecting themselves and protecting their things, and then it just begins to snowball.
So that seems like a good example of how this can be something that's unhealthy versus, sometime being prepared for an emergency, being prepared for unforeseen circumstances can be healthy. Right. It can become unhealthy quickly.
Now, again, know this, the obsessive compulsive person is going to be more likely to be a prepper because, again, there's this fear factor. What if something goes wrong? What if there is a, breakdown in the supply chain? What if, the power grid goes out? What if, and these realities in the last few years have definitely fueled those concerns, and understandably so. Again, I heard one person say to me not that long ago, he was, prepping, and he was, getting his garden ready, and he was, filling up his gas cans, and he was making sure he had batteries and all the things, checking out his generator, which is all, I think, wise things. I'm not discounting that. But he said to me, and I'll never forget this, he says, don't forget, Noah was a prepper. So, Noah knew what was coming, and Noah was a prepper. And that made sense. I mean, this person also was a former Boy Scout, and he had, this Boy Scout motto, be prepared. And even Proverbs 27:12, if we're going to, be, fair in this, Proverbs 27:12 says that a prudent person sees danger and takes precautions.
Right.
So prepping, I will argue, is not a bad thing. In many ways, it's a good thing. In many ways, it's a wise thing, especially in our area. In the last few years, like we said before, we've seen pandemics, we've seen floods in Livingston Parish.
Right. So wildfires all through the West, and hurricanes on the coast.
We've seen hurricanes.
Yeah.
Last year when Hurricane Ida came through, we saw gas lines, we saw shortages in the stores. We have barren shelves. And even the Bible says in the last days, perilous times will come. And one of the things that many are concerned today, and rightly so, is that you have, the war in Russia and Ukraine. And you have, Vladimir Putin, who is almost daily threatening some sort of nuclear war, nuclear attack. And all these things play on the hearts and minds of people. And so they're saying, maybe it is prudent that we have extra gas and extra batteries and extra water. And I will say that's important, especially in South Louisiana. Make sure your generator's running. Make sure your car has plenty of gas. Make sure that, your batteries and your flashlights are working and all those things. But I also would say this, know your neighbors. And get to know your neighbors as well. Because the more you know your neighbors and the more you have a relationship with your neighbors, if something were to go wrong, whether it be a flood or a hurricane or, Lord forbid, something even worse, that you can work with each other. You can help each other. You can, know each other. Know your church family. I think it's important that you get to know the people of your church. And if you're not a part of a church, really consider, being a part of a community of faith where you can help minister to other people. I know every time a hurricane comes into our area and it causes problems in Lake Charles or Florida, wherever it may be, we send a team of people. We send supplies. We send, financial support. And so that's a way that you can help other people and be helped by other people. Another thing I encourage folks to do is this. Improve your skills. We've let electronics, kind of take over our lives, no matter how old you are, whether you're, a dad or a mom or a teenager, we've allowed electronics to kind of take over. But when was the last time you went tent camping?
Right.
When was the last time? Because when you go tent camping, I have to, qualify that because some people think of camping going in their $300,000 RV.
RV with the AC and the TV and the microwave.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
But if you go tent camping, you may have to, cook over an open fire. You may have to, dig a latrine as we did back in the Boy Scout days. You may have to, learn how to fish and not only that, but also clean the fish. These are things that I think families, if they did them together, could create some skills and some memories. Also, if you always wanted to have that garden in the backyard or whatever, or create a little box garden, these are all things that I think we have lost in this generation that families, our parents' age and definitely our grandparents' age could do easily and readily. Learning how to can, vegetables or learning how to grow something and then can it. As you do these things with your family, here's what I understand. It will bring you closer together. It'll create some great memories. It will create, opportunities for you and your loved ones to get to know each other and do things that I think would be a blessing to you.
Well, and like you said, it can go beyond just we need to prepare for this and I've got to do this and, an obligation, something that you have to do. But, bring it back to the family answer man, right?
Right.
Creating positive bonding experiences and touch points that, especially with kids, it's something that can either be, you get them in so many activities that you're not actually spending one-on-one time with them, or it can get to a point where, it's easy to come home from work, be tired, have to get food ready for the family, do laundry, bath time, bedtime. By the time, the day is over, you haven't actually spent quality time together as a family. So it's one of those things that can actually help create those moments where you're doing things together and creating healthy attachments.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I love what that great philosopher Hank Williams Jr. said one time. He said, a country boy can survive. And so the point simply is this, is that the reason why a country boy can survive is because the country boy learned from his dad, on how to hunt, how to fish, how to garden, how to, do things that in the event that you had to, quote unquote, survive, for a few days or a few weeks because of a calamity or disaster or Lord forbid, some sort of electromagnetic pulse that shut things down for a while, that you could do so.
So it sounds like when it comes back to this question, the husband that was diagnosed with OCD, doing a lot of hoarding and prepping, that there's a distinction between those two, that hoarding is not prepping and prepping is not hoarding.
That's correct.
Exclusively, and that not all preppers are hoarders.
That's right.
And not all hoarders are preppers.
Correct.
But a lot of that can be traced back to something that you said earlier. You talked about intrusive thoughts. How do we deal with those thoughts real quick as we wrap up? How do we deal with intrusive thoughts so that we...
Yeah, intrusive thoughts are going to be things that come into our mind, based on, again, our experiences in life, based on maybe just some of the things that we have read or seen or things that we've never really completely worked through. And again, an intrusive thought is generally something that we are afraid of. For example, if a person was in a car accident as a child, there's always going to be that thought perhaps that, oh, what if I get into a car accident? What do I do? Or if a person maybe, was lost for a long period of time in the mall, what happens if I, lose, sight of my kids or, my loved one? And so these intrusive thoughts are constantly there. But again, as we said earlier, having a plan. And that's what the compulsion tries to do. The compulsion tries to, limit the fear of that thought. But I think to lower any level of anxiety, to have a plan on what I would do, and to share that plan with your family, to share that plan with your friends. If this happens, and you say this to your kids, we will do this, this, and this. And if this happens, we'll have this, this, and that. And so, for example, in Texas during the winter of 2021, there are a lot of people who had firewood. There were a lot of people who had extra batteries, a lot of people who had extra blankets, a lot of people who were able to cook a meal literally in their fireplace because they knew how to do those things. They had planned it. They had prepped, if you will. And so they were able to manage this winter storm without any power, where others who did not prep would not or could not. And so again, these intrusive thoughts or countered, if you will, by saying, here's our plan, here's what we're going to do, and it lowers the anxiety.
That's right, yeah, because it helps if you have an intrusive thought to be able to, one of the things that you mentioned, cognitive behavioral therapy, is you can't just lie to yourself. You got to tell yourself something that's true.
Exactly.
And then believe what is true.
Exactly.
And so, like Paul said, take every thought captive. Right. That we think on the things that are good and lovely, pure and holy. And as you mentioned, Proverbs 27:12, that wisdom, there's a lot of wisdom in being prepared in these situations.
Sound information, sound doctrine, realistic thinking helps to counter some of these intrusive thoughts. So I would say to this lady who wrote in, and to the husband as well, don't overdo it. Try not to obsess as much. Be watchful, be prayerful, be about your Father's business, and in so doing, that will again bring a sense of harmony and a sense of healing and a sense of health into the family as you deal with this very, very common, concern, obsessive compulsive disorder.
Well, there you have it from the Family Answer Man. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you for joining us today, and the incredible people at Winter's Air and Days Smokehouse for underwriting today's show. Again, this is not a mental health therapy session, but we do hope that the answers from the Family Answer Man today were able to help you and will inspire you to make changes that will lead to a stronger, healthier, and happier family. And as always, if you have a question that you would like to hear answered for you, you can email us at thefamilyanswerman@loumc.org.